It's roughly 6,000 years ago, somewhere in the highlands of what will one day be called Peru, and a man is holding perfectly still while a friend gently saws a coin-sized hole into the top of his skull. He is awake. He is not screaming. He is, by all accounts, mildly annoyed, the way you get when someone is taking too long at the self-checkout. What could possibly convince a Stone Age human to let another Stone Age human drill into his brain case with a sharpened rock? The answer involves an ancient logic that still explains why you once let a total stranger point a laser directly at your eyeball and called it self-care. This is the story of the weirdest things ancient humans actually did. First, the context. Early humans were not the noble, all-knowing survivalists that documentaries like to imply, striding across golden plains with a spear and a plan. They were naked, sunburned apes with mediocre night vision, no claws worth mentioning, no fur to speak of, and a wardrobe consisting entirely of whatever they happened to be standing in at the time. Every other successful predator on the savannah came factory-equipped with fangs, speed, camouflage, or some combination of the three. Humans came equipped with anxiety and a suspicious amount of free time between meals. Here's a species that looked at lions, looked down at its own soft, hairless torso, and concluded the winning long-term strategy was to think really hard about the problem. There was no owner's manual. There was no elder who had already solved fire, or grief, or boredom, or the existential horror of a thunderstorm at 3 a.m. Everything got figured out through trial and error, which sounds charming in hindsight and was, in practice, an enormous amount of dying badly so that someone else could learn from it. And a shocking number of those trials, once they actually worked, looked to any sensible outside observer completely and unmistakably insane. Take that skull drilling. Trepanation, as archaeologists politely call it, wasn't a one-off act of desperation. Researchers have cataloged thousands of ancient skulls with deliberate holes cut into them, spanning Peru, France, ancient China, and beyond, across thousands of years of unrelated cultures apparently arriving at the same conclusion independently. Here's the part that should genuinely concern you. A large percentage of those patients survived. The bone shows clear evidence of healing and regrowth around the opening, which means the person got up afterward, thanked whoever had just done this to them, and continued their day with a permanent skylight installed in their skull. Nobody has a complete list of reasons early humans did this, but the leading theories include relieving pressure from head trauma, treating seizures, and letting out what they sincerely believed were evil spirits trapped inside, which, to be fair, has roughly the same evidentiary support as several modern wellness trends, just with significantly more direct access to the frontal lobe and considerably less influencer marketing. And trepanation wasn't even the weird outlier of the ancient world. It was practically mainstream. Across multiple continents and thousands of years, people were knocking out their own front teeth on purpose as a formal rite of passage into adulthood. They were filing other teeth down into sharp points purely for aesthetics, with no dietary benefit whatsoever. They were piercing, stretching, cutting, and scarring themselves in patterns specific enough that modern anthropologists can identify which tribe someone belonged to just by examining the wound pattern on bones thousands of years old. None of this was random self-harm, and none of it was accidental. It was signaling, and it was expensive on purpose. In a world with no ID cards, no resumes, and no profile bios, your body was the only advertisement you had. And ancient humans apparently decided that advertisement needed some extremely dramatic formatting to stand out from the competition. It gets stranger still once you look at how ancient humans handled the ordinary logistics of being alive. In parts of prehistoric Europe and Central Asia, entire families slept stacked together in a single pile for warmth, a practice that sounds cozy until you remember it also meant sharing body heat, lice, and personal space with your in-laws on a nightly basis, indefinitely, with no option to move out. Elsewhere, people deliberately used their own front teeth as a third hand, gripping hides, cordage, and tools so constantly and so hard that archaeologists can spot the telltale grooves worn into fossilized teeth thousands of years later, a permanent record of someone's terrible workplace ergonomics. Urine, it turns out, was practically a Stone Age multitool, used for tanning leather, cleaning wounds, and, in some later ancient cultures, brushing teeth, because ammonia is a decent cleaning agent and nobody had invented the concept of gross yet. These weren't stupid choices. Each one was the correct answer to a problem that had no better tool available, arrived at by people running the numbers with nothing but curiosity, desperation, and an alarmingly high pain tolerance. But solving this problem created a new, slightly ridiculous psychological glitch. One you've probably felt yourself this morning, somewhere between picking an outfit and checking how many people liked your last post. Once early, humans discovered that the body could broadcast information, status, bravery, tribal identity, fertility, sheer stubborn toughness. The brain quietly rewired itself to treat that broadcast like a survival issue. Evolution doesn't reward comfort. It rewards reproduction and social standing, and if voluntarily enduring pain got you more status, more mates, or more group loyalty, your genes did not care one bit how much it hurt in the moment. Pain became a currency, and ancient humans spent it constantly. Nowhere does this get stranger or more impractical than in the caves. In Rusko Cave in Spain and Border Cave in South Africa, archaeologists have found evidence that people crawled on their bellies through pitch-black tunnels for over a kilometer underground, using nothing but a handheld torch to paint animals on a wall that almost no living person would ever see again. Not decoration for the entrance, not a billboard for passers-by, a masterpiece deliberately placed in a room chosen specifically because it was nearly impossible to reach. From a purely survival standpoint, this makes no sense whatsoever. You are burning irreplaceable calories, risking a fatal fall in absolute darkness, and using open flame in an oxygen-limited space, all to paint a bison in a location engineered for maximum privacy and minimum foot traffic. Elsewhere, people were grinding up ochre, a red mineral pigment with zero nutritional value and no protective function, and coating themselves and their dead in it for reasons that remain stubbornly symbolic rather than practical. They were chewing sticky wads of birch bark tar, not for food, but seemingly out of pure boredom, the way you'd chew gum in a waiting room. Archaeologists have since pulled ancient human DNA directly out of that chewed tar, complete with traces of the bacteria in that person's mouth, a 5,000-year-old paper trail nobody meant to leave. Symbolic behavior, art, ritual, and burial with grave goods became their own kind of fitness test. If you had the surplus energy, time, and social trust to spend on something with no immediate practical use, you were signaling that your tribe was doing well enough to afford it. Nature didn't design your brain to make you happy. It designed your brain to make you panic at rustling leaves and, apparently, to crawl into caves to make art so you'd survive long enough to pass on both the panic and the paintbrush. Something shifted when this symbolic instinct stopped being occasional and became infrastructure. Somewhere in the last 100,000 years, humans stopped treating meaning as a nice-to-have and started outsourcing it into physical objects permanently. They buried the dead with tools those people would never use again. A genuinely bizarre use of scarce resources if survival were the only priority. They wore shell beads traded hand-to-hand from communities hundreds of miles away, turning jewelry into an early supply chain. They developed shared rituals, chants, and dances specifically to synchronize large groups of near strangers into acting like a single organism. This is the moment a species that couldn't outrun a rabbit, outclimb a leopard, or outmuscle a boar became the dominant species on the entire planet. Not through better teeth or claws, but through a shared imaginary scoreboard that everyone quietly agreed to take dead seriously. It's worth sitting with how strange that actually is. Somewhere, a group of hairless primates with no natural weapons looked at their own vulnerability, shrugged, and decided the solution was to invent invisible rules: status, debt, honor, tribe, and then behave as though those rules were more binding than gravity. Every other animal on the savannah was playing a game of teeth and speed. Humans switched games entirely, and nobody else noticed until it was far too late to catch up. We like to think we conquered the food chain through pure intellect, but half of early survival was just sweating efficiently, being too stubborn to leave, and inventing elaborate social theater to keep the group from falling apart out of sheer boredom and mutual suspicion. You are, right now, the direct beneficiary of this glitch, and you are almost certainly still running the original software. You get a tattoo, not because it improves your odds against a leopard, but because it signals something about who you are, in exactly the same functional way ochre paint did 40,000 years ago. You endure the discomfort of a gym membership, a restrictive diet, cosmetic procedures, or, yes, laser eye surgery, because some ancient, unglamorous part of your brain still equates voluntary discomfort with status and self-improvement, and it has no idea it's 2026. Dogs stare at you with that particular, hopeful expression because their ancestors figured out tens of thousands of years ago that bonding with the strange hairless apes around the fire was a far better survival bet than competing with them for scraps. Even your affection for the sound of rain at night traces back to ancestors for whom rain meant the predators were also staying home. And for once, absolutely everyone got to actually rest. Your habit of chewing gum on a stressful day is a direct, almost embarrassingly literal continuation of birch tar chewing, minus the accidental DNA time capsule. Even the impulse to cram uncomfortably close together on a couch during a scary movie instead of spreading out across a perfectly good living room is the sleeping pile instinct refusing to update its firmware. None of these habits are rational in any modern sense. They persist because the reward circuitry underneath them was installed tens of thousands of years before anyone had a reason to question it. And that circuitry does not do software updates. So why did that man let his friend cut a hole in his skull? For the same reason, people today let strangers reshape their faces, inject their skin, or slice into their own corneas with a laser because the brain that evolved to keep you anxious about literal, immediate survival never got the memo that most of your modern threats are social rather than physical, and it treats them with exactly the same white-knuckled seriousness regardless. The weirdest things ancient humans did weren't malfunctions or embarrassing missteps to be quietly edited out of the highlight reel. They were the earliest working drafts of everything we now call culture, status, and self-improvement. Field-tested by people with stone tools, open flame, and absolutely nothing left to lose. We didn't get less strange as a species over the last few thousand years. We just got better branding, and we started calling it a lifestyle.